Hey, welcome aboard. To those of you who are starting to pop in, we're going to give a few more minutes for the rest of the attendees to jump in, and we'll get started shortly. Sorry, there's no music. It's a technical limitation of the platform. I promise I tried everything I could to bring you some delightful tunes, but our producer said they didn't pass quality assurance tests. So a little bit of silence, and we'll be back shortly. Thanks. This is the 2-minute warning for those of you who are still coming in. We're just giving a few extra minutes for the last few folks to jump in before we start. We're going to go right around the top of the hour, wherever that is at your current time zone. It'll be about 2 more minutes. Thanks. Okay, 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in sunny Indianapolis, Indiana. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Murph Krajewski. I am the picture at the bottom of your slide there. I'm the VP of Marketing at Sharpen Technologies. We're a cloud-based contact center platform. And I am joined today by two great friends. One, the knowledgeable and, let's say, effervescent Veronica Stauffer. Veronica is the Senior Director of Advisory Services at MNet. Veronica, how's it going today?
It's going well. Hi, nice to be here, Murph.
Great, great. We're also joined by Veronica's colleague, Jeremy Drinkard, who is the Senior Director of Professional Services at MNet. And Jeremy is gravely serious, never one to crack a joke at any time. Isn't that right, Jeremy?
That's right, Murph. I never tell any jokes. It's great to be here. Thanks.
Yep. So let's jump right in. We got a lot of ground to cover, and we've only given ourselves 30 minutes, and everybody else has a meeting right after this, so let's not waste any time. Veronica, let's just kind of talk about the industry real quick. There are a lot of financial services institutions out there. Credit unions are really well known for being very high touch with their services. But how do you know how well a credit union is really doing in providing that member experience?
Well, Murph, it's like every business initiative that you can talk about it and talk about improving it, but that's not enough. For member experience, you need to be able to quantify it. You need to be able to measure it, benchmark yourself, and also report on your performance.
Yeah, that's really important. And for years, we've been hearing about how important metrics can be. And I'm sure if anyone is listening in on this webinar, they are well familiar with the concepts of measuring and with metrics and with performance numbers. But Jeremy, how can someone know, like, what are those numbers actually telling them how to improve?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, metrics alone really don't tell people how to improve or how to improve your business. So you can set goals for hundreds of metrics, report on them hourly, and still never really make a positive impact on the membership or the staff. Metrics really work as a building block and a guidepost, but to truly understand how well the team is meeting your members' expectations, you really need to be able to translate those metrics into key performance indicators that are actionable.
Okay, good. So we're off and running now. We're talking about metrics versus KPIs. So Veronica, how about if you start walking us through just at a conceptual level, what's the difference between managing to a metric versus managing to a KPI for a credit union?
Okay, the short answer to that is that metrics they're great for if you're trying to measure volume or how quickly your staff is performing their jobs. But KPIs really get to the point of the why. Why are you there? They're member focused. So I usually will give this example that a lot of member service centers still use abandonment rate, for example, as for overall performance as a metric. And so they set the goals and say our center should not abandon more than 3% or 5% of calls. But the problem with this is that the MSRs really have no control over how many people are hanging up while they're sitting in queue. And I'm not trying to say that monitoring the abandonment is a waste of time, but in a vacuum, really, how do you improve that? So to make it more valuable, what you can do is consider using it as part of a KPI. And the KPI in this case would be member wait tolerance. So instead of looking at the overall percentage of abandoned calls to your offered calls, analyze at what point the majority of your abandoned calls are occurring. So is that at the 2-minute mark? Do you notice that people will wait longer on Fridays and Saturdays probably because they know they won't be able to contact you again until Monday? And also be able to analyze when those wait times increase, what are the common reasons that for the callers that are waiting. So this is the difference. The KPI for wait tolerance is actionable. You can move your staff breaks and lunches around to cover those periods when you know that your membership's going to have less patience to sit and listen to your own hold music. You can also use that knowledge to suggest some self-service options while your members are sitting in queue that will provide them things like account balances, which can abate some of your call volume, options to link directly to your IVR or tell them about your web banking, or even to provide some callback options.
Okay, so that's good kind of overview about metrics versus KPIs, and maybe even an initial look at a couple that we could start paying attention to. But Jeremy, do you have any other really specific KPIs that you are seeing used for really good member service centers?
Yeah, I mean, the first and perhaps the most obvious is the CSAT, which is customer satisfaction. Worked with many credit unions who refer to this as member satisfaction, for example. It's really a critical measurement in today's world. And according to research by Forbes, poor customer service costs U.S. businesses about $83 billion annually, which translates into about $289 per lost relationship. So it really adds up. And to calculate CSAT, the most common method is really to provide a range of 1 to 5 for level of satisfaction to the survey participant. So 1 might be very unsatisfied, 2 is unsatisfied, 3 is neutral, 4 is satisfied, and 5 might be very satisfied, just as an example. So the sum of the scores from all surveys completed and then divide that by the number of surveys, which gives you an average for that CSAT. And to display as a percentage, each score might be multiplied by 20. So for example, very unsatisfied might be 20, unsatisfied is 40, neutral is 60, satisfied is 80, and very satisfied becomes 100. Now, most credit unions who use this method consider only ranks 4 and 5 as a positive CSAT score. So some will total the number of surveys that were marked with those ranks and divide by the total number of surveys completed. And even though common CSAT is mathematically derived, it still functions as a KPI. The key here is that it's member focused and again, that it's actionable. Now, actionable doesn't necessarily mean additional training or coaching for the staff. What we've seen is highly effective contact centers calculate the CSAT to include member response and the credit union response. And these organizations are monitoring CSAT daily. They look for the low numbers, like the 1 and 2 scores, and then have staff proactively contact those dissatisfied members to discuss and hopefully resolve their issue. The overall CSAT score then includes the membership's rating, as well as the variables of credit union response time and the percentage of issues resolved. And actionable also extends beyond the scorecard, like keeping the membership informed of the improvements your organization has made based on feedback. And that's a great way to build loyalty. Oftentimes we see this as survey cards, for example, at the branches, and also post-call surveys for, after call, after they've been in the queue and have talked to somebody and they come out and have a post-call survey.
Nice. Okay. So Veronica, your turn. What other KPIs do you see really good credit unions monitoring, paying attention to, and acting on?
Well, I know this sounds trite, but accessibility, it's still one of the very most important features to all of your membership. So even though so many people are using web banking and their mobile apps, when they were surveyed last year, still the most cited reason for why someone chooses one financial institution over another is that there is a branch close by. And we all know that some of these people will never walk into that branch, but they like the idea, the comfort of it just being there, just in case. And they want to feel the same way if they need or to call you or reach out through some other channel. They want to know that you're there. So service level is the most obvious way to monitor and report how accessible your staff is. And this goes, though, for those centers that are doing this very effectively, way beyond our goal is 80% of 80% of calls answered in 20 seconds or less. They start using service level as a very actionable KPI instead of another metric. And the two things that we see that they do best is, the first is they understand that there's no standard to what other contact centers are using. They're not using other contact centers as their baseline. They know that their goal is never static. So the objective that's working today for you might not work for what your business is tomorrow. So they're constantly revisiting their service level goals. For example, the reasons that your membership contact you vary widely. Some of them are very time sensitive reasons like identity theft, or I had my debit card stolen, or those awful widespread data breaches that we all love that throw your call volume way high. So you can start looking also when you're trying to set this goal at your weight tolerance, which will be a factor in determining what your current service level needs to be which is varying right along with these events, whether it's time sensitive or not so time sensitive. One thing to keep in mind, and I'll try not to get myself sidetracked though, is while you're looking at setting service level and using wait tolerance, also consider your occupancy rate. So basically that amount of time people are on the phone engaged with your membership versus the time they're scheduled to be there and they're activated in the queue and they're just waiting for an interaction to come through. So look at the occupancy on two different levels. Look at it if it's very high. And when I'm saying this, I'm saying something about a good rule of thumb, 90% or higher. At this point, your staff's getting at risk for burnout. They're answering interaction after interaction. They're not getting time to really refocus and adjust after each contact. And especially if you've had a very grueling interaction, you know, an upset member on the phone, something like that, that's very difficult if you're getting bombarded with that many interactions, one right after another. And what's happening, to go back to Jeremy's point, a lot of times when this starts to occur is that the agent, him or herself, starts to feel like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm really tired, it's very hard for me to keep a positive attitude, and so of course that starts impacting the customer satisfaction. But also, it's look at the low occupancy rates, and when I say low, it's generally, rule of thumb again, is about 70% or lower. What that means is people are sitting on the phones or at their PCs waiting to get a chat or an email or whatever, and they're just waiting there. They're not, they're activated, nothing's coming into them. And when you get below the 70% mark, you're pretty much leaving some money on the table. So when you see that happening and that trending, these are the times to kind of forecast ahead, hold some one-on-ones, or maybe give your MSRs some training modules. It's a great time to do that. But let me.
So I love that you. I love that you. Sorry to break in there, but you mentioned a couple of things about occupancy and SLA and the way that a tough interaction can really start to wear down the mood or just the general experience of the agents working in the contact center. Of course, anybody who knows Sharpen or has spent 5 seconds on our website knows that we're agent first and we're very focused on the agent experience. And I just love to hear that that is a common factor across industries, that it happens in credit unions, it happens in, I don't know, media service providers, whatever. Anytime a person is trying to help another person, sometimes that gets rocky. And anytime we can smooth that over, it really does affect the bottom line.
Absolutely, it does. You always have to keep that as part of this equation as you're doing this. You also have to remember in today's world that a contact doesn't translate into a call necessarily anymore. Even just a few years ago, it seemed like omni-channel communications, emails, texts, chats, those kind of things were almost novel, that it was the tech savvy people who jumped on that, but that's not the case anymore. So, for example, I always think about what texting is to you now as opposed to when it was first introduced. It's become a critical part of your life. And the reason I bring that up is that member service centers who do this really well understand that they have to set up service levels for all the channels that they're receiving. It's not novel. People expect you to answer the phone. They expect you to answer a chat in a timely manner, and that's up on the screen of what some of the common or averages are right now as far as what member expectation is. It's no longer, it used to be a lot that, oh, we have an email queue or, we have a chat queue and we'll get to those, we'll staff those appropriately once we get through this phone volume. That doesn't exist anymore. If someone's reaching out to you, they expect to be answered. So that you'll start to watch their wait tolerance. You need to monitor their wait tolerance and also monitor the customer satisfaction for those channels as well. Lastly, and I'll finally move off of service level, is first contact resolution. And this is, of course, the KPI that's going to give you insight into your interaction routing and your staff's knowledge, their proficiency. There's several methods for measuring it. Some of them get very complicated. But the three most simple that I've come across are the first being the percentage of the interactions requiring a team member other than the original recipient, the original agent who received it, to follow up or maybe reach back out to that member versus all interactions, so dividing by all interactions. The second being the percentage of interactions transferred versus all interactions. So some people just measure that. And then last would be the number of interactions generating from the same member within a defined period of time. So if you're looking at call logs or interaction logs, you can see this. But of course, you have to have the reporting capabilities that provide notes on each segment of the interaction. That certainly helps, or having the capability to report to whom an interaction was transferred. These are things that are really going to help you define and refine this KPI. If you've got low first contact rates, that's often indicative of routing issues within your interaction flows. Sometimes that's as simple as the member didn't understand the menu selections. They didn't understand where to hit. So they're calling the wrong department and having to be transferred. If your FCR is trending lower than usual, it could also be traced to when you just have less tenured staff. Maybe you have a group of new hires who may require some more training in certain areas.
Well, and I popped out a little note there too about the omni-channel that we just talked about with service levels and tracking different interactions across different channels versus all interactions. Like that can get convoluted a little quickly, and we'll kind of get to the reporting aspect here in just a few more slides. But some great information there, different ways we can calculate FCR, the ways we can keep track of it all. So Jeremy, back to you. Once we have that calculation of the metrics that are involved, it sounds like the KPIs are fairly easy to locate inside basic ACD reports. So do you have any final thoughts on any other good KPIs that credit unions or even on just reporting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd first mention that KPIs are not just for the member service centers. In fact, there's two more that I'd like to, briefly mention that are used by the leadership within the organization to keep track of how those members feel about interacting with that credit union itself. So the first is the Net Promoter Score, more commonly known as the NPS. And this percentage really gives a snapshot of how members' thoughts, what members' thoughts are on how the credit union is doing overall. I've seen some extremely complicated formulas used in the industry to arrive at this indicator, but really have seen some great success with credit unions that distill this down into one, the post-interaction question, such as, would you recommend our credit union to your friends? Where the member can simply answer yes or no, and you don't need the respondent to qualify this response or give a 1 to 5 or anything like that. In fact, we really recommend that you don't. And for those negative responses, look up the interaction that preceded it. A reporting system that allows you to see the soup to nuts journey of that member, including a recording if available, is really the best way to hear the voice of that member. Now, the NPS can be used to evaluate any interaction within a credit union, whether it's online or in person or during a phone call. And this is one KPI where the action falls to leadership. Use the results to coach staff, identify gaps in the member journey, or the best of all, to really resolve the issue and reach out to that unsatisfied member. An initial negative response is an often missed opportunity to really build that brand loyalty. And the final KPI, similar to NPS, but focuses more on the seamlessness of the member's journey, the customer effort score. So this is the CES. These are also effectively tracked by posing a one-question survey to members following the interaction within the organization. And the heart of the question is, do you agree with the following statement? The company made it easy for me to solve my problem. And in this case, a simple yes or no option may not feel sufficient to the member. Normally, this is where the credit unions will insert, a 1 to 5 scale where, 1 is strongly disagree, all the way up to 5 where it's strongly disagree, just as an example. And then two of the most critical takeaways from CES are, one, is the interaction routing well aligned with the member's journey? So what this means is when a member reaches one of the staff members, is the team member able to resolve that issue? This is similar to FCR, the first call resolution, but does not focus on only one interaction, but also on related interactions. For example, perhaps the MSR who received the initial call did not have the authority to waive a fee that was being requested by that member, but they were able to obtain authority to do so later in the day and send a follow-up to that member. While this wouldn't fall into a first contact resolution technically, it certainly could still provide an effortless experience for that member. And then the second critical takeaway is how seamless is the omni-channel experience for that member? If a member initiates contact with you through a web chat, but then in the process of the conversation determines that a phone call would be more efficient, how quickly can that transition actually be made? And conversely, while speaking with a member on the phone, are you able to quickly send a text with a link that they need to access? So just a couple of thoughts there.
Solid. Yeah, a lot of great information on KPIs. We're gathering metrics. We're looking at actionable different data points and things that we can do to really change member experience. But okay, here comes the elephant in the room. Veronica, why does reporting suck? After all this year, all these years, and after all of the data we have crunched through and all of the spreadsheets and the crystal reports we've written, all of the headaches, why does it still suck?
You're forcing me to be diplomatic. There's a lot of reasons that reporting, we'll say, continues to be a frustration. There's the technology challenges, obviously, and a lot of these come from having multiple systems, disparate systems being clumped together, maybe a little middleware there, and it makes that cradle to grave reporting difficult. And as a result of that, you're not always able to get the data you need, or you maybe are kind of getting your data, but you're not having it presented in any kind of format that makes sense with your operation. And then the other piece, which it sounds really obvious, but I should point it out, is there's the time issue always. What we see a lot is that a lot of credit unions still rely on that, on those spreadsheet, and I'm making air quote, dashboards, to collate their data, the data that are relevant to them. And they're doing it because they have to. So really what they're doing is they're pulling stock reports from multiple systems. They're looking for those handful of fields on each of those reports that they actually need. And then this is where it becomes frustrating, is they have a staff member, or even worse, sometimes you have to do this yourself, enter that information into an Excel file. So even if you've got the resource to do that data manipulation and data entry, you're still dependent upon that person, that group, or yourself to get that task done before you have any visibility into what your performance is right now.
So it's a big problem and it affects a lot of people, and I think it's been long running, and it's got a couple of pretty simple causes. It's hard to find data and it takes a lot of time to do that stuff. So Jeremy, let's work on solving it. Like, what are some suggestions that credit union management can kind of look at and act on that they might be feeling the pinch of bad reporting?
Yeah, so really, those are really two sides of the same coin. So ideally, you want to have access to whatever data point your technology is writing to that database. And there's, unfortunately, there's no real one-size-fits-all answer to what you may need to report on. You know, there are KPIs that are part of your regular reporting practice, but you may also need other information depending on what's happening in that credit union right now. So for example, you know, are you being asked to provide budgetary numbers for the center? How many chat interactions did your team receive about the recent credit card breach? Or even, you know, did one of your MSRs really say that to the furious member who just called that extension? So, you know, in other words, we really need on-demand data. We need agile sorting features. And better yet, if you can summarize it right in your reporting tool without having to manually transfer those numbers to a spreadsheet, like Veronica had mentioned, and filter it there, you save a lot of time and, you know, as a result, a lot of frustration as well. But most importantly, I think you need numbers that are easy to understand, since, you know, you're the person that's charged with speaking to them.
Well, okay, and so I promised myself that I wouldn't be like overly promotional of Sharpen, but if you're watching this and you're feeling any of those problems, you can get some help right down there in the bottom right corner. So, okay, I'm gonna move on. So last thoughts. Veronica, what do you think? Final thoughts on how we can streamline the KPI tracking process?
Absolutely, and I'll be much more brief than I was about service level. Sorry about that. Okay. The first is that, just kind of to reiterate, that the KPIs are built on metrics, and those metrics are generally pretty commonly found in any communication platform database. Where a lot of people run into challenges that I've seen in reporting systems is that they're forced to rely mainly on canned reports that are not dynamic. You can't change things around yourself. So it does make reporting efforts much faster, as Jeremy mentioned. If you can do those calculations right there in your reporting solution, rather than pull those metrics out and put them into an Excel sheet to manipulate them. But if you can't do that currently, you might want to consider having some custom reports built for you. And what I would recommend on that one is, before you go down that route, is to make sure that you understand completely what's in your database, what's being collected, what's going on under the covers. So you basically want to see, take a look at the schema. You might be surprised. So your database analyst, your DBA, or somebody on your IT team, if you don't have direct access to that information, they should be able to help you with that. Lastly, my final thought is that to start this whole process of maybe bringing new KPIs in to your reporting, or to adjust existing KPIs and those objectives, the first thing that you really need to do is benchmark, is baseline basically where you are today. So here's my shameless plug then. As a thank you for attending the webinar, we've designed at MNet a brief white paper which has calculations and a lot of the industry averages for a lot of the KPIs we talked about today. I should have mentioned that at the very beginning in case anybody was trying to scroll down what we were saying. And we're also, for those people that are on this webinar, for the first 25 people, can provide, if you request it, a complimentary benchmarking study that's based more on your credit union's current numbers. So we'll do a more personalized benchmarking study to get you started.
Which is great. That's a really nice way to kind of get the project off the ground of cleaning up data and really getting your head around those metrics and KPIs. So for those of you who joined us today on the webinar, or actually even if you're watching this recording sometime in the future, you're actually going to automatically receive that white paper that Veronica mentioned earlier. That'll actually go out early. Okay, so if you're from the future, this doesn't apply to you, but for those of you live, you'll get it early next week, probably around Tuesday or so, in your inbox. So just keep an eye out for that. And of course, the recording to this webinar is always available. If you have a colleague or somebody else in your organization that you think might benefit from it, share it around. So anyways, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap us up, and we're actually a few minutes ahead of schedule. So I'll give you that back to your day as a free gift, no charge. Veronica, Jeremy, thank you very much for your time today. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Murph. Appreciate it.
Yes.
And thank you all for joining us. For those of you who hung through the entire time, I see you dwindling already. See you later. All right, we're going to sign off. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.